Four Corners. Living History. Tami Morton. Living History. Living history sites provide a way for people to find out about the past by actually experiencing what it was like. A living history site or museum recreates a certain time and place in history. Living history sites use actors to do the work and daily tasks of the people who lived in the past. These actors reenact, or recreate, important events of the time, interact with visitors and talk about the past as if it were happening now. When you visit a living history site, you will feel like you have stepped back in time. Many living history sites focus on life during the 19th century. This was a time of invention, exploration, and adventure. The conflict of war, the desire to visit unknown lands and search for riches, and the development of new machines significantly changed people's lives during this century. This book explores 4 living history sites that capture important events in the 1800s. Old Fort William in Canada recreates a fur trading town in 1816. Sovereign Hill in Australia shows life during the Australian gold rush of the 1850s. Gettysburg National Park in the United States stages Civil War reenactments from 1863. Bliss Hill Victorian Town in England offers a glimpse of life during the Industrial Revolution in the reign of Queen Victoria. Life in a trading town. In the 1500s, animal fur, especially beaver fur, was used to make coats and hats. Soon, traders were forced to search for new supplies of fur. There were not enough animals in Europe to keep up with the demand. Early explorers of North America discovered many fur-bearing animals. In the late 1600s, many European fur traders went to North America. There, they set up trading companies to buy animal pelts from trappers and Native Americans. The fur traders sent the pelts back to Europe where they were made into clothing. 2 of the most successful trading companies were the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company, NWC. For years, the 2 companies competed with one another. In 1821, they formed a single company under the name Hudson's Bay Company. Fort William. The Northwest Company built an office at Fort William in Canada. Fort William served as a dropping-off point between Lake Superior and the interior waterways of Canada. Furs, left by trappers at the fort, were shipped to the main office in Montreal and then on to Europe. Fort William was also a place to build and repair boats and canoes used in the trade. As a result, Fort William became the center to gather supplies and information needed by those in the fur trade. Fort William played such a critical role in the history of Canada that the Canadian government decided to rebuild the site to teach visitors about the fur trade. This living history site was named Old Fort William. It opened in 1973. Today, the site occupies 42 buildings and has more than 10,000 original and reproduced artifacts. Locals and settlers. 3 main groups of people lived and worked together in Fort William: the managers, the laborers or engages, and the Native Americans. Each of these groups is represented in the reenactments done at Old Fort William. The managers of the Northwest Company were mostly men from Scotland or England. They owned a large part of the trading company. Their jobs included arranging the transport of trade goods and marketing the furs. Engages were mostly of French descent. Many were voyageurs, or boatmen, who paddled the canoes that carried goods and furs. Their job was to take the furs from the inland posts to Montreal. Others tended animals, raised crops, manufactured goods for trading and maintained the fort. The Native Americans at the fort included the Ojibwe Indians. They were mainly hunters, trappers, and fishermen. The Ojibwe also farmed and used wild plants for food and medicine. Reliving the past. At Old Fort William, actors portray people from each of the 3 groups. The actors can be seen conducting their daily activities, just as they might have in the 1800s. Visitors can join an actor for a tour of the fort. A guide teaches visitors about the NWC, leads them on a tour of the buildings, and allows them to try some of the tools used by early settlers. One reenactment by voyagers recreates the celebration of their return with a load of fur. The actors arrive at the fort paddling canoes filled with pelts. Visitors watch and cheer, while cannons are fired to announce their arrival. The Great Rendezvous. One event that is reenacted at Old Fort William is the Great Rendezvous. This was a yearly meeting held at Fort William for the NWC managers. Trappers and traders. First held in 1803, the Great Rendezvous gave trappers a chance to exchange their furs for money or for goods. Because the NWC had its own form of money. Made up of paper bills and brass tokens, many trappers preferred to trade their pelts for goods, such as blankets and grains. Trappers learned from Native Americans. There were few towns or roads in Canada or the United States in the early 1800s. Trappers traveled along rough and dangerous rivers in unknown territories. They also explored land routes, crossing thick forests and rugged mountains. There were no roads or highways for trappers to take. Without the help of the Ojibwe and other Native American people, the Europeans probably would have failed in the fur trade. The Ojibwe introduced Europeans to snowshoes, oval-shaped shoes that were used during the snowy winters. They also taught Europeans skills in trapping, hunting, fishing, and harvesting food, such as rice. The most important skill the Europeans learnt from the Native Americans was how to build birch bark canoes. Artisans of Old Fort William. Old Fort William employs skilled craftspeople who demonstrate the crafts that were common during the fur trade era. Musket making, coopering, barrel making, canoe building, and blacksmithing are among some of the trades being discovered by visitors each year. Old Fort William highlights the importance of the fur trade in North America. It attracts more than 100,000 visitors each year who come to learn about and experience this exciting time in history. Meet a canoe builder. Dave Brown has been practicing birch bark canoe building for almost 20 years. He builds canoes that are used in reenactments and displays at the fort. When working, he dresses in clothing of the time. Dave likes birch bark canoe building because it is so unusual. You have something new with each one you build, he says. Much like the original Fort William artisans did. Dave learned his craft from another skilled person. Life in a gold rush town. In the mid-19th century, a gold rush changed Australia forever. A gold rush occurs when many people flock to a place, hoping to find gold and become rich quickly. The first large source of gold in Australia was found in 1851 in New South Wales. By the end of 1851, gold had also been found in Victoria in the area that was to become Ballarat. News of gold traveled fast and far. Within 12 months, men and some women from all parts of Australia, along with people of many nationalities, including Europeans and Chinese, had come to Australia hoping to find gold and become rich. As people moved to the area, towns were formed. The town of Ballarat was established in 1852. By September of that year, about 1,000 people had arrived and were digging for gold. Only 1 year later, the number of residents had grown to 20,000, and by 1868 it had reached 64,000. Sovereign Hill. In the 1960s, Ballarat's community decided to build a place where visitors could learn about the excitement of the gold rush period. They created Sovereign Hill, a living history site. In November 1970, Sovereign Hill opened to the public. Set on more than 24 hectares in what used to be the world's richest gold fields, Sovereign Hill has 4 different areas: an area that represents the original diggings, the main street of the town, a Chinese workers' village, and an underground mine exhibit. The site employs many skilled craftspeople and volunteers who wear period costumes and participate in the reenactments. Effects on the land. The rush of miners to Victoria had a major impact on the environment. The local lush landscape was slowly destroyed. Nearly every plant disappeared. Bird songs and animal calls were replaced by miners moving dirt and digging holes. Because of the constant digging, creeks and riverbeds were often contaminated with soil and weeds. There was not much water in the area, so the extra people and effects of mining meant that there was often not enough clean drinking water. The diggings. Red Hill Gully Diggings is one area of Sovereign Hill, named after the area where gold was first discovered. The rapid growth of this area caused many challenges, such as establishing law and order in the town of Ballarat. To organize gold mining, the government required each digger to pay an expensive fee for a gold license. The police, or troopers, had to check these licenses each week. The police were also expected to protect miners from crimes, such as robbery. Red Hill Gully Diggings. Panning for gold is messy work because diggers have to sift and re-sift dirt with water. A burning gold license. A sound and light reenactment of the Eureka Stockade is performed each night. The Eureka Stockade. Miners resented the high cost of licenses, as many were not finding very much gold, but they had to pay for the license anyway. The license cost a great deal of money, sometimes as much as the value of all the gold they found in a week. Miners were fined if they were caught without a license. The police were supposed to protect the miners, but they were also the people who fined them. In 1854, the miners rebelled and burned their gold licenses in protest. They built a stockade, or strong fence, and swore to defend their rights. As the police approached, a riot broke out. About 25 miners and police were killed. The rebellion became known as the Eureka Stockade. Digger's Oath. Before the events at the Eureka Stockade, the diggers swore this oath: "We swear by the Southern Cross to stand truly by each other, and fight to defend our rights and liberties." As a result of the Eureka Stockade Rebellion, laws were changed. Gold licenses were no longer required, and miners were given a voice about laws that affected them. The Chinese. The Chinese were the only group of people who created separate villages with their own temples, herbalists and scribes, where they kept the customs of their homeland. Visitors to Sovereign Hill can tour a typical Chinese village. The Township. Most of the miners, despite their different backgrounds, lived together in the township area of Ballarat. Sovereign Hills Township recreates life on the main street of the town. Here, many actors dress in period costumes and guide tour groups through the village. There are many shops, businesses and industries represented that existed in Ballarat. Craftspeople, such as carpenters and blacksmiths, can be seen at work with reproduction tools. Main Street, Sovereign Hill. The Mining Museum. Sovereign Hill also features an area called the Mining Museum. Here, visitors have the chance to pan for gold in the creek and keep what they find. They can also travel inside the old mines to hear stories of the working conditions. The community of Ballarat created Sovereign Hill to serve as a lasting reminder of the impact gold mining had on its history. The gold rush brought prosperity to Australia. From about 1870, gold mining became more costly and less gold was found, so mines began to shut down. Ballarat's last mine was closed in 1918, but gold miners found work in other growing businesses and industries. Visitors can walk through the long tunnels of the old mines to experience how it would have felt to work underground. Visitors panning for gold in the creek can relive the excitement of finding gold. Meet a miner. As an actor, Barry Kay expresses how miners of the 1850s felt: "We dug through the topsoil, then a layer of gravel. Boulders of granite and quartz blocked the way. Our hands were blistered from the pounding of our picks. Finally, we found some specks of gold. This livened our spirits. We made enough to put food in our mouths and clothes on our backs, little more." Miner's pickaxe. Life during the Civil War. In the mid-1800s, the people of the United States were divided in their ways of life and their beliefs. Many people in the South were farmers. Some Southern farmers used slaves to run their plantations. Slaves were originally brought from Africa, but by the mid-1800s, most were born in the United States. Slaves were not free. Their owners decided what they wore, what they did, and who they married. People living in the North did not have the same need for slaves. Farms were smaller, and many people worked in factories. Also, many Northerners were opposed to keeping slaves. They felt it was unfair and wrong. Slaves were often sold in auctions, which were advertised by posters. The Battle of Gettysburg. The disagreements over slavery grew as new territories joined the United States. The North and South argued over whether slavery should be allowed in these new regions. Eventually, the Southern states decided to secede from the Union. The American Civil War began as the Confederates fired on the Union flag at Fort Sumter in South Carolina on April 12, 1861. In July 1863, the bloodiest battle of the war took place near a small town in Pennsylvania called Gettysburg. Almost 50,000 soldiers were killed or wounded there. Several months later, President Abraham Lincoln attended a ceremony at the site to honor the dead and dedicate a cemetery to their memory. This is where he gave the Gettysburg Address. Today, the area of the battle is a national park. Map of Union and Confederate states at the start of the Civil War. Meet a Civil War soldier. Confederate soldiers tried to carry as little as possible. One soldier recalled, "I wore a cartridge box and bayonet holder on my belt. Extra cartridges were placed in pockets. Around my shoulder hung my wool blanket in which I wrapped my few belongings: a comb, toothbrush, and powder. I also had a haversack in which my plate, knife, spoon, and fork rested with what few meager rations we received." Canvas haversack. A yearly reenactment. Gettysburg National Park in Pennsylvania is different from some other living history sites. The site does not employ actors to reenact daily events throughout the year. Instead, thousands of ordinary people come together for 3 days each July to reenact the Battle of Gettysburg. The reenactment takes place in a wide-open field a few kilometers from the national park. The reenactment recreates the battle that began on July 1, 1863, and lasted 3 days. Confederate General Robert E. Lee had marched his soldiers north, looking for supplies and a Southern victory. Union General George Meade commanded the Northern soldiers. The two armies met and fought in Gettysburg. Fighting raged all over the fields of Gettysburg. Finally, Lee ordered his army to retreat on July 4. Almost 50,000 soldiers from both sides had died in just a few days. Reenactors. Reenactors live in all parts of the United States and the world. They are not paid by the park. They spend many hours learning about the battle and the period in which it took place. Usually, each reenactor specializes in a certain role. A person might play the part of a Union or a Confederate officer. Others may choose to play members of the clergy or medical corps. Women often play the part of cooks, aides in hospitals, and soldiers. Local groups of reenactors often form clubs in their communities. They meet regularly throughout the year to discuss history and rehearse scenes from the battle. They often perform for and speak to school and community groups. Union soldiers wore dark blue coats and caps with light blue trousers. Confederate soldiers usually wore gray coats and caps. Battle scenes and campsites. Each year different conflicts from the Battle of Gettysburg are presented to the public. Reenactors use reproductions of the weapons used during the battles. Cannons and rifles were the most common. Between the battle presentations, reenactors demonstrate how the weapons work. Another exciting part of the reenactment is the cavalry. During the Civil War, horses were used in battle. The cavalry was skilled at fighting on horseback. During the reenactment, more than 500 horses are used in a full-scale cavalry battle, much like ones that took place during the war. The campsites give visitors a chance to learn more about soldiers' lives. Civil War soldiers often did not have tents and slept on the ground with blankets. Visitors can see what the soldiers wore, where they slept, and what they ate. A Union soldier aims his rifle during the reenactment. The cavalry reenactment is always popular with visitors. Campsites also show what happened if a soldier became ill or was injured. Some reenactors play the part of medics who helped the sick or injured. During the Civil War, more soldiers were killed by illnesses and infection than by battle injuries. Diseases were common and often had no cures. Visitors can also learn about the roles of women at the campsites. Women mended clothes, tended the sick, and wrote letters to the families of injured soldiers. Some women worked as spies during the Civil War, while others cut their hair short and pretended to be men so they could join a regiment and fight in battle. The Civil War was a dark period of U.S. history. Although the war helped to end slavery, thousands of people were killed in its bloody battles. Each year, nearly 2 million people visit Gettysburg National Park to learn more about the Civil War and to honor those who sacrificed their lives to reunite the nation. 50 years after the Battle of Gettysburg, a Union soldier and a Confederate soldier shake hands. Women helped the war effort in many ways, including volunteering in hospitals. Life in an industrial town. The Industrial Revolution began at the end of the 18th century and continued throughout the 19th century. It was a time in which machines began to manufacture products that were previously made by hand, and people moved from farms to cities. Countries such as England, where the Industrial Revolution began, changed greatly with the inventions of the period. Natural resources of coal and iron were plentiful in Britain. These raw materials helped make the Industrial Revolution possible. Coal was used to boil water and make steam. Steam drove engines, brought about iron and steel production, and powered ships and locomotives. Steam-driven machinery could do the work of many people, so the production of goods soared. Natural resources near Iron Bridge. England ensured the town's involvement in the Industrial Revolution. Bliss Hill Victorian Town. One remarkable example of the new technology is the Iron Bridge in England. It was the world's first iron bridge and was completed in 1779. A settlement called Ironbridge grew up around the bridge. 10 museums are set along the Severn River near the bridge, because of the area's importance. The largest and most popular of the sites is a living history site called Bliss Hill Victorian Town. The site gives visitors a close-up view of a late 19th century town, during the time of Queen Victoria's reign. Some of the buildings in Bliss Hill have been restored. Others have been built to recreate the factories, homes, and shops in a Victorian town. Nearly 100 people work in Bliss Hill, wearing Victorian costumes and working with reproductions of 19th century tools. Bliss Hill. Victorian town. Growth of working towns. Industrial towns, such as Bliss Hill, were common in England in the 19th century. Factories, mills, and foundries were being built everywhere. Many people left farms to work in the factories. In the factories, wages were low and conditions were dreadful. The workforce even included children, who often held dangerous jobs. Cheap homes were built for workers. Most had neither running water nor bathrooms. Sometimes, several families lived together in one small room. Smoke and fumes from nearby factories polluted the air. Diseases spread easily because of the unsanitary conditions. Wealthy landowners built large houses in the country, away from the factories. They allowed squatters to live on their land for a yearly fee. One such squatter home is featured at Bliss Hill. 9 people lived in the 2-room house in 1861. Actors portray what life was like in such a small space. An ironworker. A squatter cottage. In town. On the main street in Bliss Hill, there are examples of many 19th century trades and stores where people would shop. A grocery shop, a candle maker, a printer, a butcher, a sweet shop, and a tinsmith are just some of the shops and trades. Costume staff reenact the roles of shopkeepers and craftspeople. They can be seen casting iron, hammering tin, and dipping candles, just as people did back in the 1800s. A Victorian pharmacy. Actors and visitors demonstrate the craft of dipping candles at Bliss Hill. Dangerous work. While the middle and upper classes enjoyed the rewards of the Industrial Revolution, the working class suffered long hours and poor living conditions. Most worked in factories doing dangerous jobs. Much of the machinery they operated was unsafe, and factory workers were often injured or killed while using the machines. Volunteers at Bliss Hill tell visitors about how easily this happened. Coal was a valuable resource that was used in foundries and homes. One dangerous work site at Bliss Hill was the coal mine. Miners worked long hours underground mining the coal. They were paid very little. Actors at the mine describe how they often could not afford to buy candles to light their homes. However, if they were caught taking home the candles used to light their way in the mines, they lost their jobs immediately. An actor is casting iron objects. Using molds at a foundry. These Iron Bridge miners from the 1800s are preparing to go underground in a special lift called a cage. Lives of Victorian children. Most working-class children had hard lives and worked long hours in factories, mines, and foundries. Boys from rich families, however, went to expensive private schools. They learnt maths, reading, writing, Latin, and Greek. Most girls from wealthy families were educated at home by a governess. In 1870, the British government decided that all children between 5 and 13 needed to be educated. Children were taught basic subjects that would help them in the working world, such as reading and writing. The Industrial Revolution changed life forever. Bliss Hill offers an opportunity to see how it affected people at the time. Each year, 260,000 people from around the world visit the site to try a taste of Victorian life. By dressing in period costumes and attending lessons, visitors can experience what school was like for some Victorian children. Meet a child miner. Here is a child's account of working in a mine. I entered the mines at 8 years. I had to travel a considerable distance, almost 5 kilometers. I was awakened at 2 o'clock. We remained then in the mine until 5 or 6 at night. It was an ironstone mine, very low, about 45 centimeters, and in some instances not quite so high. There were some 20 or more bays beside myself, and I am not aware at this moment that there is one alive excepting myself. Glossary. Artifacts. Objects made by people long ago. Blacksmithing. The trade in which a person forms objects from iron by heating and hammering it. Cavalry. An army on horseback. Confederates. Southern soldiers and supporters during the Civil War in the United States. Gold rush. Foundries. Places where iron is made into useful objects. The rapid arrival of people in a region where gold has been discovered. License. A legal paper that gives permission to do something. Living history sites. The use of artifacts, costumes, recreated buildings, demonstrations, and dialogue to portray daily life in a period from the past. Manufacture. To make objects or materials, especially by machinery, on a large scale. Musket. A gun with a long, smooth barrel. Pan. The act of looking for gold by using a round shallow metal container to separate gold from the silt of riverbeds. Pelts. Furs of animals, such as beaver. Reenact. To recreate or perform events from history. Reproduction. A copy of an original item. Secede. To withdraw from a group or organization. Squatters. People who settle on land they do not own. Tinsmith. A worker who makes or repairs things with sheets of metal. Traders. People who buy, sell or exchange goods. Trappers. People who catch animals for their fur. Union. The group of states during the American Civil War that was opposed to slavery known as the North. Voyagers. People employed by fur companies to transport goods to and from distant trading posts.